People's Democratic Party insists INEC must present server used for 2019 elections. Sanwo-Olu wins at election tribunal while PDP open case against Kwara governor. On the international scene, severe drought strikes India, causing extreme water scarcity. And in sport, NFF President Amaju Pinnick is confident of AFCON 2019 success.
This is ANN News.
I am Olajumoke Olatunji. People's Democratic Party is expressing confidence that it would prevail at the elections tribunal. The party's vice presidential candidate, Peter Obi, reassured loyalists that all hope was not lost. He said his party would not give up on the case as the election tribunal, where it is challenging President Muhammadu Buhari's victory at the February polls. Obi was speaking at the Victory Thanksgiving service in honor of Senator Princess Stella Odo, Honorable Chukwuma Oyema, and Honorable Somto Udeze in Atani, Anambra State. Obi insists that the National Independent Electoral Commission, INEC, must produce at the tribunal the server used for the election. He expressed gratitude to God and not the people he said made it possible for his party to succeed in the election. Senator Stella Odo pledged her continued commitments to empowering the youth. She said her reason for being in the Senate is to pass laws that will brighten and better people's lives and breed good governance. It's a different story in Kwara State, where PDP was still not able to get its case opened against Governor Abdurrahman Abdulrazak at the Kwara State Governorship Election Petition Tribunal. The suit was filed by the party's governorship candidate, Razak Atuwa, challenging Abdulrazak's victory in the governorship election. He alleges Abdulrazak had presented a forged certificate to INEC. The case has been adjourned to early next month because the petitioner failed to present a witness from the West African Examinations Council, whom the tribunal expected would provide relevant supporting documents. On the other hand, Lagos State Governor Babajide Sanwo-Olu had cause to rejoice as the Lagos State Elections Petition Tribunal had dismissed the petition filed by the governorship candidates of the Alliance for Democracy, Owolabi Salis, and that of the Labour Party, Ifegbemi Awamaridi. They were challenging Sanwo-Olu's victory in the February governorship election that propelled him to the State House. Tribunal Chairman Justice Titi Aswa dismissed the petition, citing the inability of the petitioners to file applications for pre-hearing conference after the close of pledges within 7 days as prescribed by law. Justice Aswa noted that the inability to serve any of the respondents was not an excuse and that the consequence of failure to apply timely for pre-hearing conference was the dismissal of such a petition. The Independent Corrupt Practices and Other Related Offences Commission, ICPC, says it is set to commence tracking the first phase of constituency projects in 12 states. This was contained in a brief signed by the Commission's Public Relations Officer, Rashidat Okodua. Had this information in a brief she provided to journalists in Abuja on Monday. The News Agency of Nigeria reports that ICPC launched the initiative in April in an effort to ensure satisfactory execution of all constituency projects as well as obtaining value for money. Members of the steering committee for the initiative included Nigerian Institute of Quantity Surveyors, Budget Office of the Federation, and Office of the Accountant General of the Federation. Okodua said the first phase of the exercise will commence in 12 states across the 6 geopolitical zones of the country. She said 5 projects have been identified for tracking in each state. 300 clearing licenses allegedly identified with fraudulent activities are said to have been suspended by Nigeria Customs Service. The license is held by the Association of Nigeria Licensed Customs Agents and its national president, Tony Nwabweke, were reportedly suspended because they were allegedly hacked and used to smuggle vehicles out of the port. The Customs Service also flagged Inewe building, which is located right next to the Lagos Port Complex, as an alleged notorious venue for smuggling syndicates specializing in producing falsified clearing documents and hacking passwords issued to licensed customs agents. Tony Wabueke, national president of the Association of Nigeria Licensed Customs Agents, lamented the suspension of his license and 300 others. He said the smuggling syndicate had perfected the act of cyber hacking. He also assailed some unscrupulous customs officer he accused of conniving with the smuggling syndicate and hacking the passwords of members of his association. The European Union Election Observer Mission to Nigeria has presented to Senate President Ahmad Lawan the final report and recommendations it has generated from the February and March elections in the country. Its head of delegation, Ketio Carlson, said the group's recommendation would help spur a conversation with the federal government on how to continue to improve electoral administration in Nigeria. Coming up, African stories, Egypt's first democratically elected president buried. And later, international news, extreme heat causes acute water shortage in India.
You are watching ANN.
Welcome back. This is ANN News and stories across Africa. Egypt's former president Mohamed Morsi, the country's first democratically elected head of state, who was later ousted from power, collapsed and died during a court session on Monday. Officials say the 67-year-old had just addressed the court during his trial and expunged charges when he collapsed. He was declared dead when he arrived at the hospital. He has been buried alongside his deceased Muslim Brotherhood members after Egyptian officials denied a request for him to be buried in his family's cemetery. Morsi became president in 2012 after Hosni Mubarak's resignation amid the Arab Spring uprising. In July 2013, during a wave of public discontent, the Egyptian army ousted Morsi. The former president was then sentenced to death in June 2015, in part for a mass jailbreak during the 2011 uprising. In November 2016, the Egyptian Court of Cassation overturned the death sentence and ordered a retrial. He was sentenced to life imprisonment by an Egyptian court in September 2017 for passing army and state security secrets to Qatar. Human Rights Watch has described the charges against Morsi as political. The group's Middle East director, Sarah Lee Whitson, said on Twitter that Morsi's imprisonment was cruel and inhumane, and said he was deprived of family visits and medical care. The Kenyan government has moved to allay fears of an Ebola outbreak in the country after a patient exhibiting Ebola-like symptoms was quarantined at the Kericho Referral Hospital, some 300 kilometers west of Nairobi. Kenya's Cabinet Secretary Cecily Kariuki says preliminary analysis on the patient has ruled out Ebola symptoms. The news of a possibility of Ebola had prompted a scare in the wake of reports that the disease had already spread to neighboring Uganda. The government has activated mitigation mechanisms, including heightened surveillance along the country's borders as well as airports. Kariuki said during a tour of Jomo Kenyatta Airport, the country remains alert and well equipped to deal with any threat posed by the disease.
I am here today to confirm that we do not have any cases of Ebola in the country today. We have been cautious and vigilant. As health workers, we have therefore taken this patient into isolation and blood samples taken to Cambry, where the tests are going on now and the analyses are happening. In the next 4 or so hours, we will be able to communicate to Kenyans again in terms of this. But at this point in time, we have ruled out any case of Ebola, even in respect of these particular patients.
Turkish Coast Guard had reported that 8 migrants have died when a boat carrying them to Greece sank off the Turkish coast on Monday. The Coast Guard said 31 other migrants were rescued after the boat sank in the Aegean Sea off the coast of Bodrum. The region is close to the Greek island of Kos. The private DHA news agency said rescuers are still searching for one other migrant who is missing. It was not immediately clear why the boat sank, although the number of migrants heading to the Greek islands from the Turkish coast has decreased since the height of the refugee crisis in 2015. Hundreds continue to make the crossing each week. A Sudanese opposition movement, the Forces of Freedom and Change, has called on its supporters to start nighttime rallies to protest against what it described as the massacre of demonstrators in the capital, Khartoum. Dozens of opposition supporters were killed earlier this month when a paramilitary group violently dispersed the peaceful sitting outside defense headquarters. The demonstrators initially protested against the 30-year rule of Omar al-Bashir and then continued to protest after he was ousted by the military. They are demanding a swift transition to civilian rule. The Forces of Freedom and Change has called for new protests to start across Sudan on Tuesday. When we return, international news. More than 70 have died in India in 2 days as a result of extreme heat and water shortage. And later, sports. Amaju Pinnick is confident of AFCON 2019 success.
You are watching ANN.
Shining our eyes on breaking news, whether in the east or in the west, with Al-Shabaab in Somalia and Boko Haram in Nigeria, with turbulence in the north and agitation in the south. Wherever you live in Nigeria, wherever news happens in Africa, we've got it covered. ANN News, connecting Africans in a truly African spirit.
Welcome back. This is ANN News. In international news, severe heat has left dozens dead over a 24-hour period in India's Bihar state as the country enters the third week of serene temperatures. The deaths occurred in 3 districts of the poor northern state where temperatures have hovered around 45 degrees Celsius or 113 degrees. 49 persons died in 3 districts of the Magad region that has been hit by drought. Most of the victims were older than 50 and were rushed to the hospital in semi-conscious states with symptoms of high fever, diarrhea and vomiting. Reporter Rainda Bauer has more.
Godavari struggles every day to collect water for her family from this almost drying well. Her village in the central Indian district of Beed is facing the worst water scarcity. Since all the wells and ponds in her village have dried, she has to trek more than 2 kilometers to fetch water. She says the load on her head weighs more than her. Just 10 days back, she came down with fever and body ache due to fatigue.
The road isn't good as it is being built. I don't get time to study. I don't get time to play. I have to bring water 3 times a day. I'm scared of falling into the well.
The only source of water is a nearby dam in these areas. In parched villages, people are forced to drink untreated water supplied by tankers. Mostly the women carry and collect water in drought-hit areas. Irregular and scarce rainfall has dried most water sources in these regions. The government is also providing fodder and water for animals in 300 such cattle camps. With no water in many villages, thousands of farmers have also moved into these camps. They are the worst hit as this drought has forced them to become refugees. Farmers are struggling the most in these drought-stricken regions. Dilip Bhushan Rao has seen 3 crop failures. He says if it does not rain this year, he will also be forced to migrate to another place for livelihood.
We have no other means of income. All we have is farming. Farming is the only livelihood for us, so we can't look after the family. It is very difficult.
To address this water emergency, the government is now prioritizing water management initiatives.
Under Jal Shuar Abhiyan, we make, rejuvenate, rebuild our small water storage structure.
People here have realized that water is life. While they wait for rains to arrive, they also know that there are no quick fix solutions to this water crisis.
The U.S. military has released new video allegedly showing Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps removing unexploded mines from a Japanese-owned tanker following suspected attacks on two vessels in the Gulf of Oman on Thursday. The images released on Monday also showed a hole on the side of the Japanese-owned vessel. The officials say appeared to have been caused by another mine. Washington blames Tehran for the reported attacks in which two vessels near the strategically important Strait of Hormuz were damaged, leaving one ablaze and both adrift, and forcing scores of crew to abandon their ships. Washington has blamed Iran for a similar attack in May off the coast of the United Arab Emirates. Iran has denied any involvement. Now, after watching this next video, you might want to be careful about what you share online. A businessman in New Zealand has been sentenced to nearly 2 years in prison for sharing footage of the Christchurch mosque attacks, which saw a lone gunman live-stream the massacre of 51 Muslims during Friday prayers in March. Philip Ops was sentenced during a court hearing in Christchurch on Tuesday after having earlier pleaded guilty to 2 charges of distributing objectionable material. New Zealand's government has outlawed the sharing of videos of the massacre, with such an offence punishable by up to 14 years in jail. In addition to sharing the footage with about 30 persons, Apps also possessed a doctored clip of the attacks featuring crosshairs and a kill count. The London-Shanghai Stock Connect began operating on Monday, joining the British and Chinese stock exchanges for the first time and giving investors access to the respective markets. UK's Financial Conduct Authority and the Chinese Security Regulatory Commission has said in a joint statement that the new program, which was established in 2015, will be based on a bilateral memorandum of understanding that will ensure regulatory cooperation. Jamie Owen reports.
The Shanghai-London Stock Connect aims to make Chinese shares available to British investors and vice versa. This tie-up was supposed to have been launched back in December, but was postponed because of uncertainties around Brexit, among other things. China says announcements like this demonstrate the country is beginning to open up its markets. For the UK's part, China will be a trading partner needed more than ever before as this country finds its feet as the UK leaves the EU.
I think it represents quite a big step for UK-China relations, and given the issues surrounding Brexit, of course, and the UK's desire to be seen as a global financial centre, or still seen as a global financial centre, it's a big step. I think to open up the Chinese economy to UK investors, but also to allow Chinese investors access to the UK and its smaller companies, is a very big step. I think it represents a major development in relations between the two financial centres.
This is a very significant opening up of the Chinese financial market, and it is an example of the step-by-step development of the Chinese capital market into one of the largest capital markets in the world.
China's Vice Premier is leading a delegation to London, but he will discover Britain's senior politicians somewhat sidetracked by the Conservative leadership campaign to decide who succeeds Prime Minister Theresa May. All of this against the ongoing backdrop of Brexit and the debate surrounding Britain's place in the EU and the wider world. Throw in a destabilizing trade war between China and the United States, and you can see why China and the UK are strengthening financial ties in an uncertain world.
Still ahead, sport. NFF President Amaju Pinnick is confident of AFCON 2019 success. Stay with us.
are watching ANN.
Shining our eyes on breaking news, whether in the east or in the west, with Al-Shabaab in Somalia and Boko Haram in Nigeria, with turbulence in the north and agitation in the south. Wherever you live in Nigeria, wherever news happens in Africa, we've got it covered. ANN News, connecting Africans in a truly African spirit.
Welcome back. This is ANN News. In sport, Nigeria Football Federation President Amaju Pinnick is optimistic that this year's AFCON finals in Egypt will be a success despite being the biggest ever event in the history of the championship. The North African country is hosting the tournament for the 5th time. Egypt had fewer than 6 months to prepare for the tournament after the Confederation of African Football snatched the hosting right from Cameroon, judged not to be ready. Pinnick, the first ever Nigerian to head the organizing committee for the biggest football championship on the continent, arrived in Cairo on Sunday and will be in Egypt to the end of the championship. Nigerian teenagers, table tennis players Usman Okonlawon and Sadiat Akim have qualified for the International Table Tennis Federation World Hopes Challenge in Muscat, Oman. The ITTF World Hopes Challenge will be staged at the Sultan Qaboos Sports Complex in the capital city of Muscat in August. Usman Okonlawon and Sadiat Akim made the cuts to the global tournament after reaching the final of the ITTF African Hopes Challenge held in Kinshasa, DRC. The Nigerian teenagers competed against players from Egypt, Tunisia, Rwanda, Uganda, Congo-Brazzaville and host Congo DRC, with the top 2 players in the under-12 and under-15 events berthing at the World Championship in Oman. More power to them. That is ANN News this evening. Thank you for joining us. For details on this and other stories, visit our website, annafrica.news. Conversation continues on our social media platforms, Twitter, Instagram and Facebook at ANN Africa TV. I am Olajumoke Olatunji. Have a pleasant evening.